Tonight, we're going to explore one of the most fascinating paradoxes that lives within every human mind: the delicate, almost mysterious balance between becoming unbreakably strong and remaining beautifully, vulnerably human. You might think that mental toughness and emotional openness are opposing forces, like oil and water that can never truly mix. But what we'll discover together is something far more intriguing: that the very techniques designed to make us psychologically invincible can, if we're not careful, slowly disconnect us from the tender parts of ourselves that make life meaningful. As you settle in tonight, let yourself wonder about this gentle contradiction: how the armor we build to protect our hearts might also become the walls that keep love out. If you're enjoying these philosophical journeys into the mysteries of the mind, I'd really appreciate a quick like or even a subscribe. It helps more than you know, and it lets me know these gentle explorations are reaching the right people. I'm always curious where you all are listening from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. I love seeing our little global community connect through these stories, each of you in your own corner of the world, yet somehow together in this quiet space of contemplation. Now dim the lights if you haven't already. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum that seems to wrap around thoughts like cotton. Or perhaps light a candle if that helps you unwind into evening's embrace. Let your body ease into whatever position feels most natural, allowing your shoulders to drop and your breathing to slow, as we settle into tonight's exploration of a psychological discovery that changed everything we thought we knew about the human capacity for strength and suffering. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a perfectly still lake just as dawn begins to touch the horizon, the air cool and clean against your skin, carrying the scent of pine and morning mist. The water before you acts like a flawless mirror, reflecting not only the solid, unchanging mountains that rise behind you, but also the shifting, ephemeral clouds that drift across the pale sky above. As you crouch down and touch the surface with your fingertip, you feel the surprising warmth of the water despite the cool air, and watch as gentle ripples spread outward in perfect circles, momentarily disturbing the reflection before it settles back into that mirror-like calm. You can hear the soft lapping of tiny waves against the smooth stones at your feet, the distant call of a lark welcoming the day, and somewhere behind you, the whisper of wind moving through tall grass. This lake, you realize as you sit quietly on its shore, holds a profound secret about the human mind: how we can learn to be both solid as stone and fluid as water, both unshakable and infinitely adaptable, depending on what each moment requires of us. The secret this peaceful lake reflects was first glimpsed by a quiet, thoughtful man named Aaron Beck in the 1960s, a psychiatrist who spent his days listening to people describe their internal worlds of worry and despair. Like many of us who have sat with someone in pain, Beck noticed something curious happening in those conversations. His patients weren't simply describing reality as it was, but rather reality as their minds had shaped it, colored by thoughts that seemed to appear automatically, unbidden, like clouds forming in an empty sky. He discovered, through careful attention and genuine curiosity, that between any external event and a person's emotional response lay a hidden landscape of interpretation, a space where meaning was made and unmade with the quiet power of thought itself. You might recognize this phenomenon in your own life: how the same situation can feel either manageable or overwhelming depending not on what's actually happening, but on the story your mind tells you about what's happening. What Beck stumbled upon, sitting in his university office with afternoon light filtering through tall windows and the distant sounds of students crossing campus, was something both revolutionary and anciently known: that our thoughts, more than our circumstances, determine our emotional reality. He watched as people trapped in cycles of anxiety and depression began to question their automatic assumptions, to examine their thoughts with the same careful attention a botanist might give to studying leaves. When they learned to gently challenge the harsh narratives their minds had constructed, stories of inadequacy, of inevitable failure, of being fundamentally flawed, something remarkable happened. Not only did their emotional suffering decrease, but they discovered a kind of mental flexibility they hadn't known they possessed, an ability to reframe their experience in ways that opened up possibilities rather than closing them down. This discovery would eventually travel far beyond the therapy room, finding its way into the training programs of elite athletes who needed to perform under crushing pressure, into the preparation protocols of special forces operators who faced life-and-death decisions daily, and into the leadership development of executives who carried the weight of entire organizations on their shoulders. The techniques Beck developed to heal trauma would be refined and sharpened into tools for preventing psychological collapse under extreme stress, methods for maintaining clarity when chaos erupted all around. Yet as these powerful techniques spread and evolved, a subtle danger began to emerge, one that Beck himself might not have anticipated when he first noticed how thoughts could be changed like clothes, selected to fit the weather of each particular moment. As you continue to sit by this peaceful lake, watching the interplay of reflection and reality on its surface, you might find yourself wondering what happens when the ability to control our thoughts becomes so refined, so automatic, that we begin to lose touch with the spontaneous emotions that connect us to others and to ourselves. What occurs when the mental armor designed to protect us from breaking becomes so thick and familiar that it starts to separate us from the very experiences that make us human? This is the paradox we'll be exploring tonight. How the same cognitive tools that can make us remarkably resilient can also, if misunderstood or misapplied, lead us into a kind of emotional isolation that defeats the very purpose of becoming strong in the first place. The water before you seems to understand this balance instinctively, remaining liquid enough to adapt to any container, yet substantial enough to support life, to reflect light, to carve canyons through solid rock given enough time and patience. Perhaps there's wisdom in this natural model, this way of being that doesn't have to choose between strength and fluidity, between protection and openness. As you breathe in the clean morning air and feel the sun beginning to warm your face, you sense that tonight's journey will take you deeper into understanding not just how to build mental toughness, but how to carry that strength in a way that enhances rather than diminishes your capacity for connection, compassion, and growth. The lake grows quieter as the day awakens around it, and you realize that to truly understand how Beck's insight evolved into both a powerful tool and a potential trap, you'll need to step back into his world, to experience the social and intellectual atmosphere that shaped his thinking. As you rise from the shore and turn away from the peaceful water, you find yourself drawn backward through time, drifting into the academic halls and consultation rooms of the 1960s, where a revolution in understanding the human mind was quietly beginning to unfold. As you rise from the shore and turn away from the peaceful water, you find yourself drawn backward through time, drifting into the academic halls and consultation rooms of the 1960s, where a revolution in understanding the human mind was quietly beginning to unfold. This gentle pull through time feels natural, like following a familiar path through a forest where each step takes you deeper into a landscape that somehow feels both foreign and intimately known, where the air itself seems to carry the weight of ideas waiting to be discovered. Picture yourself stepping through the heavy wooden doors of the University of Pennsylvania's psychiatry department on a crisp October afternoon in 1963, where the hallways smell of polished linoleum mixed with the faint aroma of coffee brewing in distant offices, and the late afternoon light streams through tall, institutional windows, casting long rectangles of gold across worn marble floors. You can hear the soft echo of footsteps, the distant murmur of conversations behind closed doors, and somewhere the rhythmic tapping of a typewriter creating reports that will never capture the full complexity of human suffering being discussed, just a few feet away. The building itself seems to hold its breath with anticipation, as if it knows that within these walls, a young psychiatrist named Aaron Beck is beginning to question everything his profession believes about the nature of depression and anxiety. Imagine following the sound of that conversation down a corridor lined with framed diplomas and black and white photographs of distinguished professors, until you reach a modest office where Dr. Beck sits across from a patient. The space between them filled not with the typical psychoanalytic formality of the era, but with something much more humble and curious. The office is comfortable in an understated way, bookshelves lined with psychology texts, a simple wooden desk scattered with notes written in careful handwriting, and two chairs positioned not across from each other in the traditional analyst-patient configuration, but slightly angled, as if encouraging conversation rather than confession. You notice how Beck leans forward slightly when he listens, his expression carrying the gentle attention of someone who has learned that the most profound discoveries often hide in the smallest details of how people describe their inner worlds. What's remarkable about this moment in history, as you settle into the invisible corner of this room and watch this quiet revolution unfold, is how Beck's approach represents such a departure from everything his colleagues believed about mental suffering. The 1960s psychiatric establishment was dominated by Freudian psychoanalysis, which suggested that depression and anxiety stemmed from unconscious conflicts rooted in childhood experiences, often requiring years of analysis to uncover and resolve. Yet here was Beck, observing something far simpler and potentially more powerful, that his patient's distress seemed to be maintained not by mysterious unconscious forces, but by patterns of thinking that were happening right now, in the present moment, patterns that could be observed, questioned, and gradually changed. You might recognize the courage this required, challenging the foundational assumptions of an entire profession based on careful observation of what was actually happening rather than what theory suggested should be happening. Beck noticed that when his patients described their problems, they weren't simply reporting objective facts about their lives, but rather sharing interpretations that had been filtered through lenses of self-criticism, catastrophic thinking, and hopelessness. A patient might say, "I failed my exam, which proves I'm worthless and will never succeed at anything," when a more balanced interpretation might be, "I failed this particular exam, which is disappointing and indicates I need to study differently next time." The difference between these two interpretations wasn't merely semantic. It was the difference between despair and the possibility of growth. As you watch Dr. Beck work with patient after patient, you begin to see how he developed what would become known as the cognitive model of emotional disturbance. Picture him at his desk in the evening hours after his patients have gone home, the office now lit by a warm desk lamp as he reviews his notes from the day, looking for patterns in the way people talk about their experiences. He notices that depression isn't simply sadness about external circumstances, but rather seems to be maintained by what he begins to call the cognitive triad: negative thoughts about oneself, "I am worthless," about the world, "everything is meaningless," and about the future, "nothing will ever get better." These thoughts, he observes, aren't occasional visitors but persistent mental companions, appearing automatically in response to daily challenges and shaping not only how people feel, but how they perceive reality itself. What makes Beck's discovery so revolutionary, as you drift deeper into understanding his world, is how it shifts the focus from the unknowable depths of the unconscious to the observable landscape of conscious thought. Instead of spending years trying to uncover the hidden meanings of dreams or childhood memories, Beck realizes that healing might be possible by simply helping people notice and question the thoughts that arise naturally throughout each day. This approach requires no special insight into mysterious psychological forces. It only asks that people become curious about their own thinking patterns, like a scientist studying the weather patterns of their own inner climate. Perhaps you've experienced this yourself. Those moments when you catch your mind in the act of interpretation, when you notice that your emotional reaction to a situation might have more to do with the story you're telling yourself about what happened than with what actually occurred. Beck's patients began to experience this kind of awakening as they learned to observe their thoughts with gentle curiosity rather than automatic acceptance. A patient who typically thought, "If I make a mistake at work, I'll be fired and end up homeless," might learn to pause and ask, "Is there evidence for this prediction? Are there other ways to interpret making a mistake?" The simplicity of this approach was both its genius and its potential danger. As word of Beck's methods spread beyond his small office in Philadelphia, other practitioners began to see remarkable results using these cognitive techniques. Patients who had been trapped in cycles of depression and anxiety for years began to experience relief in a matter of weeks or months rather than years. The method was teachable, measurable, and far more efficient than traditional psychoanalysis. Yet as these powerful tools began to spread into new domains, first into other therapeutic settings, then into hospitals, and eventually into the training programs of athletes, soldiers, and executives, something subtle began to shift in how the techniques were understood and applied. In Beck's original vision, cognitive therapy was fundamentally collaborative and gentle, a process of helping people develop a friendlier relationship with their own thinking rather than trying to control or eliminate difficult thoughts and emotions. But as the methods moved into high-performance environments where the stakes were higher, and the focus was on optimization rather than healing, the nuanced art of befriending one's mind sometimes transformed into the more aggressive pursuit of mental control. The question that Beck's work raises, and which would become increasingly relevant as these techniques evolved, is whether there's a difference between learning to work skillfully with our thoughts and learning to override them entirely. As you sit in the gathering dusk of that 1960s office, watching the soft glow of the desk lamp illuminate Beck's thoughtful face as he writes his notes, you sense that you're witnessing the birth of something profound and potentially double-edged. These insights about the power of perspective and the malleability of thought would indeed go on to help millions of people reclaim their lives from unnecessary suffering. Yet they would also plant the seeds of a more complex question. In a world where mental toughness becomes prized above all else, where the ability to reframe any adversity as a challenge becomes a competitive advantage, what happens to the parts of ourselves that are meant to feel deeply, to be moved by beauty and loss, to connect with others through the shared vulnerability of being human? This question seems to hang in the air of Beck's office like the last light of evening, neither urgent nor demanding, but persistent in its gentle insistence on being noticed. As the scene around you begins to soften and blur at the edges, you find yourself drawn toward understanding not just how these powerful techniques work, but what happens when the art of changing our relationship with our thoughts becomes the more mechanical practice of simply changing our thoughts themselves. Following this thread deeper into the mystery of human consciousness, you discover that Beck's revolutionary insight was really about uncovering something that had always been there, hidden in plain sight, the transparent space that exists between what happens to us and how we feel about what happens to us. Imagine holding a smooth, clear crystal in your hands, one that has been perfectly cut and polished until it becomes almost invisible except for the way it bends and transforms the light passing through it. As you turn this crystal slowly between your fingers, feeling its cool weight and the gentle ridges where each facet meets the next, you notice something remarkable. The same beam of sunlight, passing through different faces of the crystal, creates entirely different patterns of color and shadow on the wall behind it. The light itself hasn't changed. It's the same golden afternoon radiance that warmed your face by the lake. But the crystal's surface determines whether that light becomes a warm amber glow, a sharp rainbow spectrum, or a concentrated beam bright enough to start a fire. This crystal, as you continue to examine it with growing wonder, represents something profound about the architecture of human experience. Our thoughts are like the faceted surfaces of this crystal, and the events of our lives are like the unchanging light that passes through them. Perhaps you've noticed this phenomenon in your own life, those moments when you've experienced the same basic situation on different days, and discovered that your emotional reactions seemed to depend less on what actually happened and more on some invisible filter through which you were viewing the experience. The stuck traffic jam that feels unbearable when you're running late, but merely inconvenient when you have nowhere particular to be. The critical comment from a colleague that devastates you on a day when you're already doubting yourself, but rolls off harmlessly when you're feeling confident and secure. The rainy afternoon that feels depressing when you're lonely but cozy and peaceful when you're content to be alone. Beck's insight was that these invisible filters, these faceted surfaces of the crystal, are not mysterious or beyond our influence, but are actually made of something quite ordinary and workable: thoughts. What makes this discovery so revolutionary, as you settle deeper into contemplating the crystal in your hands, is how it shifts our understanding of where our emotional experience actually comes from. The prevailing wisdom of Beck's era suggested that our feelings arose directly from our circumstances, like smoke rising inevitably from fire. If something bad happened, you naturally felt bad. If something good happened, you naturally felt good. The intensity of your emotional response was understood to be proportional to the intensity of the external event. But Beck noticed something different in his careful observations. Between the external event and the emotional response, there was always an intermediate step, an interpretation, a meaning-making process, a story that the mind told itself about what had just occurred. Picture yourself sitting in a quiet library on a winter evening, the kind of hushed space where you can hear the soft whisper of pages turning and the distant hum of heating vents, where the air smells faintly of old paper and the leather bindings of countless books. Imagine that you're reading about an experiment where the same short film clip is shown to two different groups of people, but each group receives different information about what they're watching. The first group is told they're viewing a documentary about tribal coming-of-age rituals, while the second group is told they're watching a demonstration of torture techniques. The film itself is identical. The same images, the same sounds, the same sequence of events. Yet the two groups report dramatically different emotional reactions to what they've witnessed. Their thoughts about what they were seeing literally changed their experience of seeing it. This is the first principle that Beck discovered, and that would eventually evolve into one of the most powerful tools for mental resilience: cognitive reframing, or what we might simply call the practice of conscious perspective-taking. At its most basic level, this principle suggests that we can learn to recognize the automatic thoughts that arise in response to challenging situations, examine whether those thoughts are helpful or accurate, and if necessary, deliberately choose more balanced or constructive ways of interpreting what's happening. It sounds almost impossibly simple when stated this way. Yet the implications are profound enough to transform not only therapeutic practice, but eventually the training programs of elite athletes, military operators, and anyone whose performance depends on maintaining psychological stability under pressure. You might wonder how something so apparently straightforward can be so transformative, and the answer lies in recognizing just how automatic and unconscious this meaning-making process usually is. Consider how quickly your mind generates interpretations of ambiguous situations. A friend doesn't return your text message, and within seconds you might find yourself thinking they're angry with me, or they don't care about our friendship, or I said something wrong. These thoughts arise so rapidly and feel so obviously true that we often don't even notice them as thoughts. Instead, they feel like direct perceptions of reality. The practice of cognitive reframing begins with learning to catch these lightning-fast interpretations in the act, to pause long enough to ask, "Wait, is that necessarily true? Are there other ways to understand what's happening here?" As you continue to examine the crystal in your hands, turning it slowly to watch how each new angle creates different patterns of light, you begin to appreciate the artistry involved in this practice of conscious perspective-taking. Like a skilled photographer who understands how changing the angle, lighting, or lens can completely transform the same subject, someone trained in cognitive reframing learns to approach challenging situations with a kind of creative flexibility. knowing that the first interpretation their mind offers is not necessarily the most accurate or helpful one available. They learn to ask themselves gentle questions. What evidence do I have for this interpretation? What evidence might contradict it? How might someone else view this situation? What would I tell a good friend who was facing this same challenge? The real elegance of this approach, as you let these ideas wash over you like warm water, lies in how it honors both the reality of difficulty and the possibility of growth. Cognitive reframing is not about pretending that painful things aren't painful or convincing yourself that problems don't exist. Rather, it's about recognizing that even in genuinely difficult situations, we often have more choice than we realize about which aspects of the challenge we focus on, what meaning we derive from the experience, and how we position ourselves in relationship to what's occurring. A failed relationship can be interpreted as evidence that you're unlovable, or as valuable information about what you need in partnership. A professional setback can be seen as proof that you're incompetent, or as a necessary course correction on the path toward work that better suits your talents and values. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this practice, as the crystal in your hands seems to grow warmer and more luminous in the fading light, is how it gradually teaches us to hold our own thoughts more lightly, with less attachment and more curiosity. Instead of being completely identified with the first story our mind tells us about what's happening, we learn to recognize that story as one possible interpretation among many. This creates a spaciousness around our experience, a gentle breathing room that allows us to respond rather than merely react, to choose our perspective with the same care that an artist chooses colors for a painting. Yet as this practice of conscious perspective-taking began to spread beyond Beck's modest therapy office in Philadelphia, something subtle began to shift in how it was understood and applied. In therapeutic settings, cognitive reframing remained a collaborative process of inquiry, a gentle exploration of alternative viewpoints done in service of healing and self-understanding. But as these techniques migrated into high-performance environments where the stakes were higher, and the focus was on optimization rather than healing, the nuanced art of working with thoughts sometimes transformed into something more aggressive and controlling, the pursuit of mental invincibility rather than mental flexibility. This transformation raises questions that seem to shimmer just beneath the surface of consciousness, like shapes moving in deep water that you can almost but not quite bring into focus. What happens when the ability to reframe any situation becomes so automatic that we lose touch with our authentic emotional responses? When does skillful perspective-taking cross the line into emotional disconnection? And perhaps most importantly, how do we cultivate the power to work skillfully with our thoughts without losing access to the wisdom that sometimes comes through feeling deeply, even when those feelings are uncomfortable or inconvenient? These questions seem to shimmer just beneath the surface of consciousness, like shapes moving in deep water that you can almost but not quite bring into focus. What happens when the ability to reframe any situation becomes so automatic that we lose touch with our authentic emotional responses? When does skillful perspective-taking cross the line into emotional disconnection? As these thoughts settle like sediment in still water, you find yourself drawn toward understanding something even more mysterious and profound: how the human spirit sometimes transforms the deepest wounds into sources of unexpected wisdom, and whether this alchemy of suffering holds secrets that pure mental control could never access. Picture yourself walking along a forest path just after a tremendous storm has passed, where the air still carries the clean, electric scent of rain and ozone, and where fallen branches and scattered leaves tell the story of nature's recent violence. The ground beneath your feet feels soft and yielding, carpeted with pine needles that release their fragrance with each step, while overhead, shafts of golden sunlight pierce through the broken canopy, illuminating droplets of water that cling to spider webs like tiny crystals. As you round a bend in the path, you discover something that stops you in quiet amazement: A massive oak tree that has clearly been struck by lightning, its trunk split and scarred down one entire side, yet somehow more beautiful and compelling than any of the undamaged trees around it. New growth emerges from the wound itself, tender green shoots that speak of resilience beyond mere survival, while the lightning scar has created intricate patterns in the bark that catch and hold the light in ways that smooth, unmarked wood never could. This wounded yet magnificent tree represents something that researchers and philosophers have only recently begun to understand about the human capacity for transformation, the phenomenon known as post-traumatic growth, where individuals don't simply recover from devastating experiences, but actually develop beyond their previous levels of functioning, discovering strengths, insights, and depths of meaning they never knew they possessed. You might recognize this pattern in your own life or in the stories of people you've known, those moments when someone emerges from a period of profound difficulty, not just intact, but somehow enlarged, as if the breaking open created space for something new and essential to grow. This transformation represents a fundamentally different process from the cognitive reframing we explored with our crystal metaphor, though the two phenomena are intimately connected in ways that reveal the remarkable complexity of human adaptation. Where cognitive reframing involves consciously choosing more helpful perspectives on challenging situations, post-traumatic growth occurs when life delivers experiences so overwhelming that they shatter our basic assumptions about ourselves, other people, and the nature of reality itself. These are the earthquakes of human experience, the sudden loss of someone we thought would always be there, the diagnosis that forces us to confront our mortality, the betrayal that destroys our faith in human goodness, the failure so complete that it strips away every story we've told ourselves about who we are and what we're capable of achieving. Perhaps you've felt the particular quality of disorientation that follows such earth-shaking events, that sense of standing in the rubble of everything you thought you knew, wondering not just how to rebuild, but whether rebuilding is even possible. The cognitive tools that worked for everyday challenges suddenly feel inadequate, like trying to repair a demolished house with a small toolkit designed for minor household repairs. In these moments, simple reframing, the practice of finding alternative perspectives on difficult situations, isn't enough, because the situation has revealed that our entire framework for making sense of life needs to be fundamentally reconstructed. Imagine sitting by a warm fire in a cozy cabin on a winter evening, watching the flames dance and flicker as they consume the logs, transforming solid wood into light, heat, and the gentle crackling sounds that make winter nights feel safe and contemplative. The process you're witnessing is one of complete transformation. The wood doesn't simply change its shape or position, but undergoes a fundamental alteration of its very substance, releasing energy that had been stored within its fibers for decades or even centuries. This is closer to what happens in post-traumatic growth, not a surface-level change in perspective, but a deep restructuring of the self that can only occur when the old structure has been thoroughly broken down. The research on this phenomenon, pioneered by psychologists like Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, reveals that this transformative process unfolds in remarkably consistent ways across different types of trauma and different cultural contexts. The journey typically begins with what they call seismic events, experiences powerful enough to shatter an individual's fundamental beliefs about themselves and their world. This shattering, while initially devastating, creates what we might think of as psychological space, room for new understandings, values, and ways of being that couldn't have emerged within the constraints of the previous worldview. You might wonder what distinguishes those who experience growth from trauma versus those who remain stuck in cycles of suffering. And the answer seems to lie not in the nature of the traumatic event itself, but in how individuals engage with the long, often painful process of meaning-making that follows. Those who experience post-traumatic growth don't simply endure their suffering passively or try to quickly return to their previous state of functioning. Instead, they engage in what researchers call deliberate rumination, a conscious, ongoing effort to make sense of what happened, to understand how it has changed them, and to integrate their new understanding into a more complete and nuanced view of life. As you continue to contemplate the lightning-struck tree, running your fingers along the rough edges of its transformed bark, you begin to appreciate the profound difference between this organic process of growth through breaking and the more mechanical approaches to mental toughness that sometimes emerge from cognitive techniques. The tree didn't choose to be struck by lightning, nor did it consciously decide to grow new shoots from its wound. The transformation happened through a natural process of breakdown and regeneration that required both the destructive force of the lightning and the tree's innate capacity for healing and renewal. Similarly, post-traumatic growth involves a mysterious collaboration between the devastating power of certain life experiences and the human spirit's remarkable ability to create meaning from meaninglessness, to find purpose in pain, and to discover strength in the very places where we felt most broken. This understanding opens up fascinating questions about the relationship between conscious mental training and the deeper, less controllable processes of human transformation. The cognitive reframing techniques that grew out of Beck's work represent one powerful approach to building psychological resilience, the development of mental skills that can be deliberately applied to manage thoughts and emotions under pressure. But post-traumatic growth suggests that some of our most profound development happens not through conscious control, but through learning to work with forces beyond our direct influence, learning to be present with difficulty without immediately trying to fix or change it, developing the capacity to tolerate uncertainty and ambiguity, and cultivating what spiritual traditions might call surrender or acceptance in the face of experiences that exceed our ability to understand or control them. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of post-traumatic growth, as you step back from the tree and see how it fits into the larger ecosystem of the forest, is how it reveals that human beings are fundamentally creative creatures, capable of weaving meaning from even the most chaotic and painful experiences. The individuals who undergo this transformation don't simply bounce back to their previous level of functioning. They bounce forward, developing what researchers identify as 5 key areas of growth: a deeper appreciation for life and its preciousness, stronger and more authentic relationships with others, recognition of personal strength they didn't know they possessed, exploration of new possibilities and life paths, and enriched spiritual or existential understanding. These changes aren't merely cognitive. They're not simply new thoughts or perspectives layered over an unchanged foundation. Instead, they represent fundamental shifts in how individuals relate to themselves, to others, and to the mystery of existence itself. A person who has walked through the valley of profound loss might emerge with a quality of presence and compassion that wasn't accessible before their suffering. Someone who has faced their own mortality might discover a clarity about what truly matters that transforms every subsequent decision. A person who has experienced the complete failure of their carefully constructed life plans might develop a kind of creative flexibility and trust in uncertainty that opens doors they never knew existed. Yet as profound and beautiful as this process can be, it also highlights the fundamental tension we've been exploring between different approaches to psychological strength and resilience. Post-traumatic growth requires a kind of openness to being changed by difficult experiences, a willingness to let our fixed ideas about ourselves and our lives be dissolved and reformed through contact with forces beyond our control. This stands in interesting contrast to the more goal-oriented approaches to mental toughness that emphasize maintaining composure, controlling our responses, and preserving our ability to function effectively regardless of external circumstances. As you prepare to leave this forest clearing, taking one last look at the lightning-struck tree with its scars and new growth intertwined in patterns of devastating beauty, you sense that we're approaching something crucial about the nature of human strength and adaptation. The question that begins to form isn't whether conscious mental training or organic transformation through difficulty is the right approach to building resilience, but rather how these different pathways might complement and inform each other in the development of individuals who are both powerfully capable and deeply human. As you prepare to leave this forest clearing, taking one last look at the lightning-struck tree with its scars and new growth intertwined in patterns of devastating beauty, you sense that we're approaching something crucial about the nature of human strength and adaptation. Following this thread deeper into the mystery of human preparation and practice, you find yourself drawn toward understanding how some individuals learn to work with their own minds and bodies like master craftspeople, developing an arsenal of invisible tools that can be deployed with precision when the stakes are highest. Picture yourself entering a workshop at twilight, where the last rays of golden sunlight filter through tall windows, casting long shadows across workbenches that have been polished smooth by decades of careful use. The air carries the mingled scents of wood shavings, leather oil, and the faint metallic tang of well-maintained tools, while the soft sounds of evening settle around you. The distant call of birds returning home, the gentle creaking of the old building as it cools from the day's warmth, and somewhere the rhythmic tapping of a craftsperson making final adjustments to their work. As your eyes adjust to the dimmer light, you notice something remarkable about how this space is organized. Every tool has its precise place, arranged not for display but for efficiency, each implement positioned exactly where reaching hands can find it without thought, without hesitation, in the dark if necessary. The master craftsperson working at the central bench moves with a quality of attention that seems both intense and effortless, their hands flowing between different tools and techniques with the kind of fluidity that comes only from years of deliberate practice. You realize you're witnessing something profound about the relationship between preparation and performance, how certain individuals develop what we might call an internal workshop, a collection of mental and physical techniques that become so thoroughly integrated they can be accessed automatically, even under conditions of extreme stress or distraction. This internal workshop represents the practical application of all the insights we've been exploring about the mind's capacity for adaptation and control, where cognitive reframing taught us that we can consciously choose our perspectives, and post-traumatic growth revealed how deeply we can be transformed by overwhelming experiences. These advanced mental preparation techniques show us how to proactively train our nervous systems to respond skillfully to challenges that haven't yet arrived. It's the difference between learning to swim by being thrown into deep water, which might lead to growth or might lead to drowning, and systematically developing swimming skills in a safe environment so that when you encounter deep water, your body knows exactly what to do. Perhaps you've noticed in your own life how certain activities or practices seem to create a sense of calm readiness, a feeling that whatever comes next, you're prepared to meet it with composure and clarity. This might happen during meditation or prayer, while walking in nature, or even during mundane activities like washing dishes or folding laundry, moments when your mind settles into a quality of alert relaxation that feels both peaceful and powerful. These experiences offer glimpses of what becomes possible when we deliberately cultivate what researchers call stress inoculation, the practice of gradually exposing ourselves to manageable levels of challenge in order to build up our capacity to handle greater difficulties with grace. Imagine watching our craftsperson as they begin working on a particularly intricate piece, one that requires not only technical skill, but also the ability to remain calm and focused despite the high stakes of the project. Perhaps it's a commission for someone they care about deeply, or a piece that will determine their reputation in the community. Notice how they begin not by rushing directly into the complex work, but by first engaging in what appears to be a series of preparatory rituals, carefully cleaning and arranging their tools, taking several slow, deep breaths, and then spending a few minutes working on simpler tasks that warm up their hands and settle their attention. This is an external example of what we might call rehearsal of ruin, the practice of mentally and physically preparing for challenges by visualizing potential difficulties and practicing responses in a safe, controlled environment. The principle behind this approach is both elegant and profound. By repeatedly exposing ourselves to detailed, vivid mental simulations of stressful situations, we can desensitize our nervous systems to the shock of unexpected difficulties, while simultaneously programming more skillful responses that become available automatically when we need them most. A public speaker might visualize their microphone failing and practice continuing their presentation without amplification. A surgeon might mentally rehearse handling complications during a routine procedure. An athlete might imagine competing while injured or in terrible weather conditions. These aren't exercises in pessimism or anxiety, but rather sophisticated forms of mental cross-training that expand our range of competent responses to challenging circumstances. You might recognize this principle from your own experience of learning complex skills, how the activities that initially required all of your conscious attention gradually became so automatic that you could perform them while thinking about something else entirely. Driving a car, typing on a keyboard, playing a musical instrument. All of these abilities develop through a process where deliberate practice eventually creates what psychologists call overlearning, where the skill becomes so deeply embedded in your nervous system that it requires minimal conscious oversight to execute effectively. The advanced mental preparation techniques we're exploring work on the same principle, but instead of training specific physical movements, they train emotional regulation, cognitive flexibility, and decision-making under pressure. The craftsperson at their bench demonstrates another crucial element of this internal workshop, what we might call the silent study, the practice of maintaining continuous but gentle awareness of their own internal state while engaged in demanding work. Watch how they periodically pause, not to rest or check their progress on the external project, but to notice subtle changes in their breathing, the tension in their shoulders, or the quality of their mental focus. This represents a sophisticated form of self-monitoring that allows them to detect and address the early signs of stress, fatigue, or distraction before these internal states can interfere with their performance. This capacity for interoceptive awareness, the ability to perceive and interpret the subtle signals of your own body, functions like an early warning system that can detect emotional or cognitive overload long before it reaches the level of conscious awareness. Perhaps you've experienced moments when you suddenly realized you were holding your breath, or when you noticed that your jaw was clenched without remembering when the tension began. These are glimpses of the information that's always available from your internal landscape, but which usually remains below the threshold of attention unless we deliberately cultivate the skill of noticing. As you continue to observe this master at work, you begin to appreciate another dimension of their practice, the use of what we might call command phrases, brief verbal cues that seem to organize their attention and regulate their emotional state with remarkable efficiency. When a challenging moment arises in their work, perhaps a tool slips or a piece of wood splits unexpectedly, you hear them murmur something under their breath, a short phrase that immediately seems to restore their composure and refocus their attention on solutions rather than problems. These aren't magical incantations, but carefully chosen words that have been paired through practice with specific mental and emotional states, functioning like verbal keys that can unlock particular qualities of mind when they're needed most. The power of these techniques lies not in their individual effectiveness, but in how they work together as an integrated system of mental preparation and real-time regulation. The rehearsal of difficult scenarios builds confidence and expands the range of situations that feel manageable rather than overwhelming. The continuous self-monitoring provides early detection of internal states that might interfere with performance. The command phrases offer precise tools for quickly accessing helpful mental states when challenges arise. And underlying all of these specific techniques is what we might call tactical delay, the trained ability to insert a tiny pause between stimulus and response, creating space for conscious choice rather than automatic reaction. This last element might be the most important of all, because it represents the foundation that makes all other conscious interventions possible. In the gap between something happening and our response to what happened lies all of our power to choose our reaction consciously, rather than simply being carried along by whatever emotional or cognitive pattern happens to be strongest in that moment. The craftsperson demonstrates this repeatedly. When something unexpected occurs, there's always a brief moment of stillness, a pause just long enough for them to assess the situation and choose their response rather than simply reacting from habit or impulse. You might wonder about the relationship between these highly developed techniques for mental control and the more organic processes of growth and transformation we explored in the lightning-struck forest. At first glance, they might seem to represent opposite approaches, one emphasizing conscious preparation and control, the other involving surrender to forces beyond our direct influence. Yet as you watch the craftsperson work with such skillful precision, you begin to sense that these approaches might be complementary rather than contradictory, different tools for different types of challenges, or perhaps different phases of the same larger process of human development. The question that emerges as you prepare to leave this workshop, carrying with you the memory of tools arranged with perfect precision, and the image of hands that know exactly what to do in any situation, is what happens when such remarkable skill at mental control becomes not just a set of techniques to be used when needed, but a permanent way of being in the world. As the craftsperson extinguishes the lamps and the workshop settles into darkness, you find yourself wondering whether there might be hidden costs to becoming so supremely capable of managing one's own internal landscape. This understanding opens a doorway to something more complex and troubling, the recognition that the very armor we forge to protect ourselves from life's inevitable wounds might, over time, become indistinguishable from our skin, creating barriers that we can no longer remove even when we want to. Picture yourself wandering through the halls of an ancient museum on a quiet Sunday afternoon, where the soft echo of your footsteps on polished marble mingles with the distant murmur of other visitors and the gentle hum of climate control systems working to preserve treasures from across the centuries. The air carries that distinctive museum scent of old stone and careful preservation, while filtered daylight streams through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that dance like tiny spirits in the golden beams. As you turn a corner into a less traveled wing of the building, you discover a display that stops you in contemplative silence. A suit of medieval armor, perfectly preserved and polished to mirror brightness, standing in a climate-controlled case as if its wearer had simply stepped out for a moment and might return at any time. As you examine this remarkable artifact, you begin to notice details that speak to both its protective power and its profound limitations. The steel plates are masterfully crafted, each piece shaped to deflect the deadliest weapons of its era while still allowing the wearer to move and fight effectively. The joints are engineering marvels, constructed with such precision that they could protect a knight from sword strikes and arrow points while preserving enough flexibility for mounted combat. Yet as you study the armor more closely, you begin to sense something unsettling about its completeness, its total coverage. Every inch of the wearer's body would have been protected, but every inch would also have been separated from direct contact with the world, unable to feel the warmth of sunshine, the texture of another person's hand, or even the gentle movement of air across their skin. This magnificent suit of armor becomes a powerful metaphor for understanding what can happen when the psychological techniques designed to protect us from emotional overwhelm become so habitual, so automatic, that they begin to function even when protection is no longer needed. You might recognize this pattern in people you've known who seem remarkably composed and competent in all situations, yet somehow difficult to truly connect with, as if there's an invisible barrier between their internal experience and their interactions with others. These individuals often appear supremely confident and self-possessed, yet there's something about their presence that can leave others feeling strangely alone, even in the midst of conversation or collaboration. The process by which protective psychological techniques can evolve into permanent barriers is both subtle and predictable, beginning with the entirely reasonable need to develop coping mechanisms for genuinely challenging circumstances. Perhaps you've witnessed this transformation in someone who started their career in a demanding field: medicine, law enforcement, military service, or high-level business, where emotional detachment and mental toughness are not just valuable but essential for effective functioning. Initially, they learn to compartmentalize their feelings during work hours, to maintain professional composure under pressure, and to make difficult decisions without being paralyzed by emotional considerations. These are healthy, adaptive responses to legitimate professional demands. Imagine watching this transformation unfold over years, like observing the slow growth of a tree whose branches gradually adapt to prevailing winds until its entire shape reflects the forces it has endured. At first, the individual consciously puts on their psychological armor at the beginning of each workday and removes it when they return home, maintaining clear boundaries between their professional persona and their personal life. They might be coolly analytical during a crisis at work, then warm and emotionally available with their family in the evening. The armor is a tool they use, not something they are. But gradually, as the demands of their work intensify or as they encounter particularly challenging experiences, the armor begins to feel less like something they wear and more like something they are. The cognitive techniques that once required conscious effort, reframing negative thoughts, maintaining emotional distance from painful situations, suppressing immediate emotional reactions in favor of rational analysis, become so automatic that they activate even in situations where emotional openness and vulnerability would be more appropriate and beneficial. You might have observed this shift in someone close to you, noticing how their responses to personal situations begin to carry the same quality of detached competence they bring to professional challenges. A romantic partner expresses hurt feelings about something seemingly minor, and instead of responding with empathy and curiosity, they analyze the situation like a technical problem to be solved. A child shares excitement about a small achievement, and instead of matching their enthusiasm, they offer measured, rational feedback that somehow manages to diminish rather than amplify the joy. These responses aren't malicious or intentionally cold. They reflect the activation of mental habits that have become so deeply ingrained they operate below the level of conscious choice. The tragedy of this transformation lies not in the loss of effectiveness. These individuals often remain highly capable and successful by conventional measures, but in the gradual erosion of their capacity for the kind of spontaneous emotional resonance that makes human connection meaningful and nourishing. As you continue to study the armor in its pristine display case, you begin to understand how protective mechanisms that start as conscious choices can evolve into unconscious constraints that limit not only what can hurt us, but also what can truly touch us, move us, or surprise us with unexpected beauty or tenderness. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of this process is how it often remains invisible to the person experiencing it. From the inside, the gradual thickening of psychological armor feels like growing wisdom, increasing competence, and freedom from the emotional volatility that once felt overwhelming or distracting. The individual may notice that they feel less anxious, less reactive to criticism, and more capable of handling whatever challenges arise. What they may not recognize is that they're also becoming less accessible to positive emotions, less capable of feeling genuine excitement, deep gratitude, or the kind of vulnerable love that requires emotional risk. This emotional numbing doesn't happen all at once, but rather through a process that researchers describe as emotional blunting, where the overall intensity of feeling gradually diminishes across the entire spectrum of human emotion. It's not that such individuals become completely emotionless, but rather that their emotional range narrows, like a radio that can no longer pick up the full spectrum of available frequencies. They may still experience satisfaction from achievements, pleasure from familiar activities, and affection for people they care about. But these feelings often lack the vibrancy and spontaneity that characterize emotional aliveness. You might wonder why this narrowing of emotional range constitutes a problem if the individual feels more in control and less vulnerable to emotional pain. The answer becomes clear when we consider that emotions serve essential functions beyond simply making us feel good or bad. They provide crucial information about our environment, our relationships, and our own needs and values. Fear alerts us to genuine dangers. Sadness helps us process losses and transitions. Anger signals when our boundaries have been violated, and joy indicates when we're aligned with what truly matters to us. When we become too skilled at managing or suppressing these signals, we risk losing access to the wisdom they contain. More significantly, emotions are the primary medium through which we connect authentically with other people. The capacity for empathy, our ability to sense and respond to the emotional states of others, depends on our own emotional aliveness and flexibility. When we armor ourselves too thoroughly against feeling our own difficult emotions, we simultaneously reduce our ability to recognize and respond appropriately to the emotions of others. This creates a tragic irony. The techniques we develop to make ourselves more capable of helping and leading others can gradually undermine our capacity for the kind of genuine connection that makes our help and leadership truly meaningful and effective. As you step back from the armor display and allow your gaze to soften, taking in the broader context of the museum hall with its collection of artifacts from different eras and cultures, you begin to sense that we're approaching a crucial understanding about the nature of human strength and vulnerability. The question that seems to hover in the air like incense, neither demanding immediate answers nor allowing itself to be ignored, is whether it's possible to develop genuine psychological resilience without sacrificing the very qualities: emotional openness, spontaneity, and capacity for deep connection that make resilience worthwhile in the first place. As you turn away from the medieval armor and begin walking toward the next wing of the museum, you find yourself wondering what wisdom might be found in exploring how true strength might coexist with genuine tenderness. Following this thread deeper into the mystery of human nature, you discover that this tension between protection and openness has been contemplated by thinkers across centuries and cultures, each offering their own piece of a puzzle that perhaps can never be completely solved, only lived with greater awareness and grace. Picture yourself ascending a spiral staircase that leads to the museum's highest tower, where each step takes you further from the bustle of the main galleries and closer to a place of quiet contemplation. The stone steps are worn smooth by countless visitors over the decades, and your hand trails along a wrought iron banister that feels cool and solid beneath your palm. As you climb higher, the sounds of the museum below gradually fade until all you can hear is your own gentle breathing and the soft whisper of air moving through the ancient stonework. Light filters through narrow windows, casting shifting patterns on the curved walls, and you notice how the air grows cooler and somehow more rarefied with each turn of the spiral. When you finally reach the top, you find yourself in a circular room with tall windows looking out in every direction, offering a panoramic view of the landscape that stretches endlessly beyond the museum's walls. From this elevated perspective, you can see how the immediate vicinity with its carefully tended gardens and orderly pathways connects to wilder terrain in the distance. Rolling hills covered with forests where paths wind between ancient trees, meadows where wildflowers grow in patterns that follow no human design, and far mountains that rise like sleeping giants against the horizon. This view becomes a perfect metaphor for understanding how the specific insights we've been exploring about resilience and vulnerability fit into the much larger landscape of human wisdom about strength, suffering, and the art of living well. As you settle into a comfortable chair near one of the windows, feeling the warmth of afternoon sunlight on your face and watching clouds cast moving shadows across the distant hills, you begin to trace the silver threads of connection that link different wisdom traditions across time and geography. In the East, Buddhist philosophy has long recognized the paradox we've been exploring, teaching that true strength comes not from hardening ourselves against life's inevitable changes and losses, but from developing what they call gentle resilience, the capacity to bend without breaking, to remain present with difficulty without being overwhelmed by it. This tradition speaks of the importance of maintaining what Pema Chodron calls a soft spot, a place within ourselves that remains tender and open even as we develop the skills to navigate life's challenges with greater equanimity. You might recognize this quality in people who have clearly faced significant hardships, yet somehow retained a warmth and accessibility that draws others to them. These individuals seem to embody a paradox. They are simultaneously strong and soft, protected and open, wise about the reality of suffering, yet somehow not hardened by their knowledge. The Buddhist understanding suggests that this integration is possible because true resilience doesn't come from avoiding pain or controlling our responses to it, but from learning to work skillfully with the inevitability of change and loss, developing what the tradition calls unconditional friendliness toward all aspects of our experience, even those we might prefer to avoid. In the Western philosophical tradition, the ancient Stoics wrestled with similar questions about the relationship between strength and emotional openness, though their approach emphasized different aspects of the same fundamental challenge. Stoic philosophy, often misunderstood as promoting emotional suppression, actually taught a sophisticated form of what we might now call emotional regulation, the development of wisdom about which aspects of our experience we can influence and which we must learn to accept with grace. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his private journal during military campaigns and political crises, revealed a man who was simultaneously one of the most powerful rulers of his time and someone deeply committed to examining his own emotional reactions with honest vulnerability. Perhaps you've encountered the Stoic principle that we can choose our responses to circumstances even when we cannot choose the circumstances themselves, and noticed how this insight resonates with Beck's discoveries about cognitive reframing, while pointing toward something even more profound. The Stoics weren't advocating for emotional numbness, but rather for what they called prasach, a quality of mindful attention that allows us to observe our automatic reactions without being completely controlled by them. This creates space for what they considered the highest human capacity, the ability to act from wisdom and virtue rather than merely from impulse or conditioning. As you continue to gaze out at the vast landscape spread below, watching how light and shadow play across different terrains, you begin to appreciate how these various wisdom traditions are like different vantage points on the same mountain, each offering valuable perspective on the universal human challenge of how to live with both courage and compassion, strength and sensitivity. Modern research in psychology and neuroscience has begun to validate many of these ancient insights, showing that the most resilient individuals aren't those who never feel deeply or never struggle with difficult emotions, but rather those who have developed what researchers call emotional granularity, the ability to recognize, name, and work skillfully with a wide range of emotional states without being overwhelmed by them. This scientific understanding reveals something beautiful about the nature of human emotional intelligence. Our capacity for nuanced feeling isn't a weakness to be overcome, but rather a sophisticated information system that, when we learn to read it skillfully, can guide us toward responses that are both effective and deeply humane. The person who has learned to recognize the subtle difference between anxiety and excitement, between healthy caution and paralyzing fear, between appropriate sadness and destructive despair, possesses a kind of internal compass that can navigate complex situations with remarkable precision. Interestingly, this capacity for emotional sophistication seems to develop not through suppressing difficult feelings, but through learning to be present with them long enough to understand their messages and choose our responses consciously rather than reactively. You might have experienced this yourself in moments when you've been able to feel angry about an injustice while still responding to the situation with measured thoughtfulness. Or when you felt genuinely sad about a loss while simultaneously appreciating the love that made the loss meaningful. These experiences suggest that emotional maturity involves not the elimination of difficult feelings, but the development of what we might call spacious awareness, the capacity to hold multiple, even contradictory, emotional truths at the same time. This understanding helps explain why some approaches to building mental toughness can become counterproductive if they emphasize control and suppression over awareness and integration. When we try to eliminate emotional reactivity entirely, we risk losing access not only to the information that difficult emotions provide, but also to the full spectrum of human feeling that includes joy, wonder, creative inspiration, and the capacity for deep empathy and connection. The challenge, as these various wisdom traditions suggest, isn't to become invulnerable, but to become what we might call vulnerably strong, capable of remaining open to the full range of human experience while developing the skills to work with that experience wisely and compassionately. As the afternoon light begins to shift and the shadows grow longer across the landscape below, you notice how the same terrain that looked one way in bright sunlight reveals entirely different qualities as the light changes. Hills that appeared gentle and inviting now show their steeper faces, while valleys that were hidden in shadow begin to glow with reflected light. This natural demonstration of how perspective changes with viewing conditions offers a perfect metaphor for understanding how the same life experiences can be navigated in multiple ways, depending on the quality of awareness and the skillfulness of response we bring to them. Perhaps the most profound insight that emerges from this panoramic view of human wisdom about strength and vulnerability is that the question isn't whether to be strong or tender, protected or open, but rather how to develop the flexibility to be what each moment requires. Like a skilled sailor who knows when to raise the sails to catch favorable winds and when to take them down to weather a storm, the person who has integrated these different approaches to resilience possesses what we might call adaptive capacity, the ability to read the conditions of each situation and respond with the most appropriate combination of strength and softness, courage and caution, firmness and flexibility. This adaptive capacity represents a kind of mastery that goes beyond the simple application of techniques or the rigid adherence to any single philosophy of resilience. It requires not only the development of various skills and approaches, but also the wisdom to know when and how to use them, and perhaps most importantly, the ongoing commitment to remain present and responsive to the unique demands of each new challenge, rather than defaulting to habitual patterns that may no longer serve the situation at hand. As you prepare to descend from this place of expanded perspective, carrying with you a sense of the vast landscape of human wisdom about living well, you find yourself wondering how such adaptive mastery might be cultivated and practiced in the context of everyday life. Drifting further along this philosophical path, you discover that the answer lies not in mastering any single approach, but in learning to weave together all the threads we've been exploring into a living tapestry of wisdom that can flex and adapt while maintaining its essential integrity. Picture yourself entering a weaver's cottage on a late afternoon when the golden light of approaching evening streams through tall windows, illuminating countless threads of different colors, textures, and weights that hang from wooden spools arranged along the walls. The air carries the scent of wool and linen, mixed with the faint aroma of tea brewing on a nearby table, while the soft sounds of the countryside drift through open windows. The distant lowing of cattle returning home, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, and somewhere the rhythmic creaking of a water wheel turning slowly beside a mill stream. At the center of this peaceful space sits an enormous loom, its wooden frame polished smooth by decades of use. And before it works a master weaver whose hands move with a grace that seems to transform the act of threading individual strands into a kind of meditation. As you watch this craftsperson work, you begin to understand something profound about the nature of integrated wisdom. Each thread that passes through their fingers represents a different quality or capacity. Some are strong and coarse, designed to provide structure and support, while others are fine and delicate, meant to add beauty and subtle texture to the overall design. Some threads are bold and vibrant, catching the eye and drawing attention, while others are neutral and understated, serving to harmonize and balance the more dramatic elements. The weaver's art lies not in using only one type of thread, but in understanding how different qualities can work together to create something more beautiful and durable than any single strand could achieve alone. This becomes a perfect metaphor for understanding how the various approaches to resilience and emotional intelligence we've been exploring might be integrated into what we could call adaptive wisdom, the capacity to draw upon different resources and responses depending on what each situation requires. The cognitive reframing techniques that Beck pioneered represent one essential strand in this tapestry, providing the ability to shift perspective consciously when old ways of thinking no longer serve. The stress inoculation practices we discovered in the craftsperson's workshop form another crucial thread, offering proactive preparation for challenges that may arise. The capacity for post-traumatic growth that we witnessed in the lightning-struck tree provides yet another strand, representing our ability to be transformed and enlarged by difficult experiences rather than simply enduring them. You might recognize this integrative approach in people who seem to navigate life's complexities with unusual grace and effectiveness, individuals who can be simultaneously compassionate and decisive, vulnerable and strong, realistic about challenges, and genuinely optimistic about possibilities. These people appear to possess what we might call emotional intelligence in action, not just the theoretical understanding of different emotional and cognitive strategies, but the lived wisdom to know which approach will be most helpful in any given moment. Imagine watching the weaver as they encounter a section of their work where one thread has broken or become tangled, disrupting the pattern they've been carefully creating. Notice how they don't abandon the entire project or force the damaged thread back into place, but instead pause to assess the situation with calm attention, gently remove the problematic strand, and then skillfully integrate a new piece that restores the integrity of the overall design while sometimes actually improving upon the original pattern. This demonstrates something essential about resilient living. It's not about avoiding all disruptions or maintaining perfect control, but about developing the flexibility to work creatively with whatever challenges arise, viewing them as opportunities for adaptive innovation rather than simply as problems to be eliminated. This capacity for creative adaptation requires what we might call meta-awareness, the ability to step back from our immediate reactions and automatic patterns and observe them with the same kind of gentle, curious attention that the weaver brings to their work. When we develop this quality of consciousness, we become capable of recognizing when our habitual responses to stress or challenge might not be the most appropriate for the current situation, and we can consciously choose from a broader repertoire of possible reactions. Perhaps you've experienced moments of this kind of meta-awareness yourself, times when you noticed your mind moving toward its usual patterns of worry or reactivity, and were able to pause and ask yourself, what does this situation actually call for? Would it be more helpful to reframe this challenge as an opportunity, to accept what I cannot change, to take protective action, or to simply be present with the difficulty without immediately trying to fix it? This capacity to choose consciously from multiple options, rather than defaulting to whatever response feels most familiar, represents a sophisticated form of emotional and cognitive flexibility. As you continue to observe the weaver's hands moving steadily through their complex dance of threading, tensioning, and pattern making, you begin to appreciate another crucial aspect of integrated wisdom: the importance of rhythm and pacing in sustainable practice. Notice how the weaver doesn't work with constant, driving intensity, but instead follows a natural rhythm that includes periods of focused activity alternating with moments of rest and reflection. Sometimes they pause to step back and examine their work from a different angle. Sometimes they stop to sip their tea and gaze out the window at the gathering twilight. And sometimes they simply sit quietly with their hands folded, as if allowing some deeper wisdom to inform their next series of movements. This rhythmic approach to work and life represents something essential about sustainable resilience. It cannot be maintained through constant vigilance and effort, but requires regular cycles of engagement and restoration, action and reflection, giving and receiving. The individuals who demonstrate the most enduring forms of strength and wisdom are typically those who have learned to honor these natural rhythms, recognizing that periods of apparent inactivity are often essential for the integration and renewal that make continued effectiveness possible. You might notice how this understanding challenges some of the more aggressive approaches to mental toughness that emphasize constant readiness and perpetual high performance. While there are certainly situations that require sustained focus and effort, treating every day as if it were a crisis eventually depletes the very resources we're trying to develop and protect. The weaver's approach suggests that true mastery involves knowing not only how to work skillfully, but when to work and when to rest, when to push forward and when to pause and reassess. As the light outside the cottage begins to fade and the weaver starts to organize their tools and cover their work for the evening, you sense that you're witnessing something that goes beyond mere craft technique into the realm of wisdom about living well. The tapestry on the loom is still unfinished, yet there's no sense of urgency or frustration about its incomplete state. Instead, there's a quality of patient engagement with the process itself, a recognition that beautiful and meaningful work unfolds over time through sustained attention and care rather than through force or hurry. This attitude toward unfinished work offers a powerful metaphor for understanding how to live with the ongoing nature of personal development and the cultivation of resilience. Just as the weaver doesn't expect to complete their tapestry in a single day, we might learn to view our own growth in emotional intelligence and adaptive capacity as a lifelong practice, rather than a problem to be solved once and for all. This perspective can help us approach our inevitable setbacks and challenges with greater patience and self-compassion, recognizing them as natural parts of the larger process, rather than as evidence of failure or inadequacy. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this integrated approach to resilience and wisdom is how it allows for what we might call paradoxical thinking, the ability to hold seemingly contradictory truths in creative tension rather than feeling compelled to choose one or the other. As you prepare to leave this peaceful cottage, taking one last look at the partially completed tapestry with its intricate patterns of light and shadow, strength and delicacy, you realize that the question of how to cultivate such integrated wisdom is beginning to resolve itself into something both simpler and more profound than you might have expected. The path forward seems to involve not the mastery of any particular technique or philosophy, but rather the development of what we might call presence, the capacity to be fully awake and responsive to whatever each moment brings, while drawing skillfully from all the resources and understanding we've developed along the way. As these thoughts settle like sediment in still water, you find yourself stepping from the timeless realm of the weaver's cottage into a garden where ancient wisdom takes root in the soil of contemporary life, where the eternal questions we've been exploring bloom into practical possibilities, for how we might live with greater awareness and grace in our own complex modern world. Picture yourself walking through a garden in the early evening, where the last golden light of day filters through leaves that are just beginning to show the first subtle hints of autumn's transformation, and where the air carries the mingled scents of late-blooming roses and the earthy richness of soil that has been tended with patience and care through many seasons. The garden pathways are made of smooth stone worn gentle by countless footsteps, and as you walk, you can hear the soft murmur of water flowing through hidden channels, the distant hum of bees working among the lavender, and somewhere the peaceful sound of wind chimes responding to the evening breeze. This garden represents a space where the philosophical insights we've been exploring find expression in the rhythms and choices of everyday life, where abstract wisdom becomes as practical and nurturing as the herbs growing in carefully tended beds. As you pause beside a fountain where clear water bubbles up from an underground spring and flows in gentle cascades over weathered stones, you begin to notice how this garden demonstrates the very principles of adaptive wisdom we discovered in the weaver's cottage. Some plants here require full sunshine and well-drained soil, thriving on challenge and exposure, while others prefer the cool shade and rich moisture found beneath larger trees. The gardener who tends this space has learned to provide different conditions for different types of growth, understanding that true abundance comes not from imposing a single approach on all plants, but from creating diverse environments where various forms of life can flourish according to their nature. You might recognize this same principle operating in your own life, how different situations seem to call for different qualities of response, different aspects of your personality and capabilities. The focused intensity that serves you well during a challenging work project might be exactly the wrong approach for consoling a friend who is grieving, while the open, receptive presence that creates intimacy in personal relationships might feel inappropriate during a crisis that demands swift, decisive action. The art of adaptive living involves developing what we might call contextual intelligence, the ability to read the demands and opportunities of each situation and respond with the most appropriate blend of qualities. This contextual intelligence begins with what the weaver demonstrated so beautifully, the capacity for present-moment awareness that allows us to perceive what's actually happening rather than what we expect or fear might be happening. Perhaps you've experienced moments when you've been so caught up in your own internal narrative about a situation that you've missed important cues about what the other person was actually feeling or what the circumstances genuinely required. The development of presence involves learning to step out of the story our minds automatically create about what's occurring and instead cultivate what we might call fresh eyes, the ability to see each moment as if encountering it for the first time. Imagine sitting on a comfortable bench beside the fountain, feeling the gentle mist from the water on your face, and watching how the evening light plays across the surface of the pool, creating patterns that are never quite the same from moment to moment. This constantly changing play of light and water becomes a perfect metaphor for the nature of mindful presence. It's not a static state of awareness, but rather a dynamic quality of attention that can shift and adapt while maintaining a stable center of clear observation. When we develop this capacity, we become capable of noticing the subtle signals that indicate what each situation is asking of us, whether it's calling for courage or compassion, firmness or flexibility, action or patience. This quality of adaptive presence has profound implications for how we navigate the complex emotional landscape of contemporary life, where we're often required to shift rapidly between different roles and contexts throughout a single day. You might be called upon to be a competent professional during a morning meeting, a supportive friend during a lunch conversation, a patient parent during an afternoon challenge, and a caring partner during an evening discussion, each requiring a different constellation of qualities and responses. The development of presence allows us to make these transitions consciously rather than carrying the energy and assumptions from one context inappropriately into another. Perhaps you've noticed how certain people seem to possess this quality of adaptive presence naturally, appearing fully engaged and appropriate regardless of the situation they're in, as if they have access to some internal compass that always points toward the most helpful response. These individuals often demonstrate what researchers call emotional agility, the ability to experience their emotions fully without being controlled by them, and to choose their responses based on their values and the needs of the situation, rather than simply reacting from whatever feeling happens to be strongest in the moment. As you continue your walk through the garden, you discover an area where older, well-established trees provide shelter for younger saplings, their broad canopies creating the perfect conditions for new growth, while their deep root systems help stabilize the soil during storms. This natural demonstration of interdependence and mutual support offers insight into another crucial aspect of adaptive wisdom: the recognition that our individual resilience is always embedded within and supported by our connections with others. The hyper-individualistic approaches to mental toughness that we explored earlier in our journey often overlook this fundamental truth about human nature, that we are essentially social beings whose well-being and effectiveness are intimately connected to the quality of our relationships and our sense of belonging within larger communities. The most resilient individuals aren't necessarily those who can handle everything alone, but rather those who have cultivated what we might call relational intelligence, the ability to build and maintain supportive connections while also contributing meaningfully to the welfare of others. You might reflect on the people in your own life who embody this kind of connected strength, individuals who seem to draw upon deep wells of personal resilience while also being remarkably generous in their support of others. These people often demonstrate a quality that transcends the simple dichotomy between strength and vulnerability. They are simultaneously powerful and tender, self-reliant and interdependent, confident in their abilities and humble about their limitations. They seem to understand intuitively that true security comes not from making ourselves impervious to life's challenges, but from developing the capacity to meet those challenges with grace, while maintaining our connections to the people and values that give our lives meaning. Interestingly, this integrated approach to resilience often results in what we might call effortless effectiveness, a quality of competence that doesn't feel forced or strained, but rather flows naturally from a deep alignment between one's actions and one's authentic nature. When we're operating from this place of integrated wisdom, we find that we can handle significant challenges and pressures without losing touch with our sense of humor, our capacity for joy, or our ability to be fully present with the people we care about. The work gets done, the problems get solved, and the responsibilities get met, but somehow without the grinding effort and emotional cost that characterizes less integrated approaches to high performance. As the light continues to fade, and the garden settles into the peaceful rhythms of evening, with night-blooming flowers beginning to release their subtle fragrances and the first stars appearing in the darkening sky above, you sense that you're witnessing something that points beyond technique and strategy into the realm of what we might simply call wise living. The garden doesn't strive to be anything other than what it is, a place where different forms of life can flourish according to their nature within a harmonious whole. Yet in being fully itself, it becomes a source of beauty, nourishment, and inspiration that enriches not only the creatures who live within it, but also every visitor who enters its peaceful sanctuary. This natural demonstration of integrated flourishing suggests that perhaps the ultimate expression of adaptive wisdom lies not in perfecting our ability to control our responses to life's challenges, but in learning to live with such authenticity and presence that our very being becomes a source of healing and inspiration in a world that often feels fragmented and disconnected. As you make your way toward the garden's entrance, carrying with you the scent of roses and the memory of light dancing on water, you find yourself wondering what it might mean to embody this quality of presence so completely that the boundary between wisdom and simply being fully human begins to dissolve entirely. following this thread deeper into the mystery of what lies beyond all our careful techniques and philosophical frameworks. You discover that the most profound insights often arrive not through thinking or striving, but through a kind of gentle releasing into what has always been present, waiting patiently beneath the surface of our awareness like underground springs that feed all the visible gardens of our lives. Picture yourself walking along a moonlit path that leads away from the garden and toward a quiet lake, where the surface of the water reflects the star-filled sky so perfectly that it becomes impossible to tell where the heavens end and the earth begins. The night air is soft and warm against your skin, carrying the gentle fragrance of jasmine that blooms only in darkness, while the sound of your footsteps on the sandy path mingles with the distant calls of night birds and the barely audible whisper of small waves lapping against the shore. As you approach the water's edge, you notice how the moonlight transforms everything it touches, creating a world that seems both familiar and utterly mysterious, where the ordinary boundaries between solid and liquid, near and far, self and other begin to blur in the most natural and peaceful way. This lake at night becomes a perfect metaphor for the state of consciousness that emerges when we've moved beyond the need to choose between different approaches to resilience and wisdom, when we've learned to embody what we might call integrated presence, a way of being that includes and transcends all the various techniques and insights we've explored throughout our journey. In this state, the cognitive reframing that Beck taught us doesn't disappear, but neither does it feel like something we have to remember to do. Instead, it becomes as natural as breathing, a spontaneous flexibility of perspective that arises organically from a deeper quality of awareness that is simultaneously grounded and spacious, responsive and stable. You might recognize this quality in moments when you felt most authentically yourself, while also being completely present to what the situation required. Times when you've been simultaneously strong and tender, decisive and open, fully engaged, yet somehow unattached to particular outcomes. In these moments, there's often a sense that you're not doing something right so much as being aligned with something much larger than your individual will or effort, as if your personal awareness has become transparent to a wisdom that flows through all of life. As you settle onto a comfortable piece of driftwood at the water's edge, feeling the gentle warmth of the wood beneath you and listening to the subtle symphony of night sounds that surround the lake, you begin to understand something profound about the nature of true psychological integration. All the tools and techniques we've explored, the ability to reframe challenging situations, the practice of stress inoculation, the cultivation of emotional intelligence, the development of supportive relationships, begin to function not as separate skills to be deployed strategically, but as different expressions of the same underlying capacity for present-moment responsiveness. This unified awareness doesn't eliminate the need for skillful action or thoughtful preparation. Rather, it provides what we might call the ground of being from which all skillful responses naturally arise. When we're operating from this integrated presence, we find that we know intuitively when a situation calls for cognitive reframing, and when it calls for simply feeling our feelings fully. We sense naturally when challenge mode serves us, and when acceptance mode better fits what life is offering. We discover that we can be simultaneously protected and open, prepared and spontaneous, without any sense of contradiction or internal conflict. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this integrated awareness is how it reveals that the paradox we've been exploring throughout our journey, the tension between becoming unbreakably strong and remaining authentically human, was never really a problem to be solved, but rather a creative tension to be danced with. Like the lake that can be simultaneously still and moving, solid and fluid, reflecting and transparent, human consciousness at its most mature can hold apparent opposites in dynamic balance without needing to resolve them into a single, fixed position. Imagine watching the moonlight on the water as clouds drift across the night sky, noticing how the reflection changes constantly, yet somehow maintains its essential luminous quality. Sometimes the lake appears solid as silver, Other times it seems to dissolve into rippling patterns of light and shadow. Yet underneath all these surface changes, there's a quality of depth and spaciousness that remains constant, a fundamental stillness that includes and embraces all movement. This becomes a perfect metaphor for the kind of consciousness that can remain centered and responsive regardless of what life brings, not because it's rigid or defended, but because it has learned to identify with the awareness that observes all experiences rather than with any particular experience itself. You might have touched this quality of awareness in moments of meditation or prayer, during experiences of natural beauty that temporarily dissolved your sense of separation, or in times of crisis when something deeper than your usual thinking mind took over and guided you through challenges with unexpected wisdom and grace. These experiences point toward what spiritual traditions have long recognized as our deepest nature, not the part of us that thinks and feels and plans and worries, but the aware presence that witnesses all of these activities with unconditional acceptance and love. As you continue to sit by the peaceful lake, watching the play of light on water and feeling the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, you begin to sense that this aware presence is not something we need to develop or achieve, but rather something we need to remember and trust. It's what remains when we stop trying so hard to be strong or wise or good, when we relax our grip on all our carefully constructed identities and strategies, and simply allow ourselves to be present with what is. This recognition doesn't diminish the value of all the psychological tools and insights we've explored. Indeed, it provides the foundation that makes their skillful use possible. When we're grounded in this deeper awareness, we can employ techniques like cognitive reframing or stress inoculation without becoming attached to them, using them when they serve and releasing them when they don't. We can be strong when strength is called for and vulnerable when openness serves, not because we've mastered some complex system of responses, but because we've learned to trust the intelligence that flows naturally from present moment awareness. Curiously, this state of integrated presence often feels remarkably ordinary rather than exotic or spiritual. It's more like coming home to something we've always known than like achieving something new. There's a quality of effortlessness to it, a sense that we're finally swimming with the current of life rather than against it. Problems don't disappear, but our relationship to them becomes more spacious and creative. Challenges still arise, but they feel more workable, less personal, more like weather patterns that pass through our awareness rather than fundamental threats to our well-being. Perhaps you can sense this quality right now, as you rest beside this peaceful lake with nothing to achieve or prove or figure out. Notice how it feels to simply be present with the gentle sounds of water and night birds, with the soft warmth of air against your skin and the quiet rhythm of your breathing. There's something in this simple presence that includes and transcends all the complexity we've explored together, a quality of awareness that is simultaneously utterly ordinary and profoundly mysterious. As the night deepens around you and the lake grows even more still and reflective, you realize that this journey we've taken together, from Beck's discoveries about the power of perspective to the lightning-struck tree's demonstration of growth through adversity, from the craftsperson's workshop tools to the weaver's integrated artistry, has been leading toward this moment of simple recognition. All wisdom traditions, all psychological insights, all techniques for building resilience ultimately point toward the same fundamental truth, that beneath all our strategies and efforts lies an aware presence that is already whole, already capable of meeting whatever life brings with grace and wisdom. The gentle lapping of water against the shore seems to whisper an invitation to release even these final thoughts about presence and integration, to let go of the need to understand or remember or apply anything at all. In this moment, there's only the soft darkness, the quiet water, the peaceful rhythm of breathing, and the spacious awareness that witnesses it all with perfect acceptance. As your eyes grow heavy and your body settles deeper into the warm embrace of night, you realize that this awareness, this simple presence that requires nothing and includes everything, is perhaps the greatest teacher of all, offering its wisdom not through words or concepts, but through the direct transmission of being itself, inviting you to rest completely in the mystery of consciousness that is both uniquely yours and utterly universal. As natural as moonlight on water, and as profound as the depths from which all light emerges. As these thoughts about Beck's wisdom and the gentle paradox of being both strong and tender dissolve into the deeper currents of sleep, you find yourself no longer needing to hold on to any particular insight or remember any specific technique. For perhaps the greatest understanding comes not through grasping, but through releasing, not through becoming anything new, but through returning to the vast awareness that has always been present beneath all our efforts to become unbreakable or more human. These ideas now drift like moonlight on water, becoming indistinguishable from the quiet rhythm of your breathing, where strength and vulnerability merge into something larger than either could be alone, something that flows through consciousness like Beck's own curiosity, became part of the eternal exploration of what it means to be awake in this mysterious world. And as the boundaries between thought and dream begin to blur, you realize that wisdom itself might be nothing more than this gentle settling into what is, this soft dissolving of all the careful distinctions we've made between protection and openness, between armor and tenderness, until there's only this drifting awareness that carries all questions and all answers in its quiet depths. Flowing beyond words now, beyond the need to be anything other than this gentle breathing presence that includes all paradoxes in its vast embrace, traveling toward that space where philosophy becomes dream and dream becomes the deepest rest.